Chapter 126 A Call for Help. Wonderful. He was undoubtedly a pervert too, Mia thought as she hastily finished what she had gone into the restroom to do before he would open the door on her like he'd said. She was washing her hands in freezing water in the sink when he opened the door and said, "Time's up, sweetheart." He grinned at her, his gray eyes sparkling with dark amusement. Mia, however, gritted her teeth and shot him a glare. Then, brushing past him, she headed towards her car that was parked at the gas station pump. Instead of getting into the BMW, Neil hung back, his hand in his pocket with the gun, as he noticed the security cameras and the few cars at the gas station. "Put gas in the car," he instructed her, lounging against the side of the car and watching her while she obeyed. "Pay for it," he ordered when she was done, keeping his face turned away from the cameras. An idea momentarily overrode Mia's frustration and fear. She could swipe her card and put in the wrong code to get the security's attention. She started to fish out her card when she realized he was holding out money in his outstretched hand. Her resentment mounted a dozen times by the realization that he was biting back a half smile as he gazed at her with amusement dancing in his eyes. "I think you're starting to enjoy this more than you should," she snapped bitterly, grabbing the money out of his hand. Neil watched her rigid shoulders as she turned away, and he reminded himself that it would be far wiser and far more beneficial if he could ease some of her hostility as he'd intended to do earlier. If he could put her in a decent humor and make her relax, that would be even better than having her hate him more. And so he said with a low chuckle, "You're absolutely right. I think I am beginning to enjoy this, señorita." "Go to hell," she replied. The winter morning sun was beginning to rise from the gray sky with a pinkish color in the cloud when Mia realized Neil might have fallen asleep on his seat. He'd made her stick to the back roads, avoiding the main highway, which made traveling in the deep snow so hard that she had only averaged 30 miles per hour for long stretches. 3 times they had been held up for hours because of accidents on the highway, and still he made her go on. Because he had taken her phone, she had no other way to know what was happening beyond their journey. Thus, she had turned on her car radio and put it on a low volume to know what was happening in the city. All night long, the radio had been filled with news reports about his escape, but the further into Avalora they traveled, the less the news was being reported of his disappearance, no doubt because no one expected him to be traveling north, away from the airports, trains, and buses. Mia had just passed a sign that said a picnic rest area was 5 miles ahead. She hoped that this rest area would be similar to the last one they had passed, with a few trucks parked and their drivers sleeping inside. Throughout the tiring drive, the simplest plan she could think of was to let him escape with her car. Considering the circumstances, it appeared to be the only viable solution. However, now that he was asleep in the seat beside her, Mia had come up with another idea. Her plan was to pull into the rest area, park alongside the trucks, abruptly hit the brakes, jump out of the car, and scream for help loudly enough to wake the sleeping truck drivers. In her fantasy scenario, a group of strong truck drivers, preferably large men armed with guns and knives, would wake up, rush to her aid, overpower Neil Wayner, and call for help from the police and military. Although Mia understood that this ideal outcome might be unlikely, even if just a fraction of it came to pass, if just one driver woke up and investigated her screams, she was confident that she would be freed from Neil Wayner. Once she raised an alarm and attracted attention, his only logical choice would be to flee in her car. There would be no benefit for him to shoot her and then proceed to attack the other drivers, as the first shot would alert everyone else. Any attempt on his part to shoot down all the truck drivers just to take her would be just plain stupid, and stupid was one thing Neil Wayner was not. Mia was so certain that she would succeed in her escape plan this time. She stole another searching look at Neil to make certain he was really sleeping. His arms were crossed over his chest, his long legs were stretched out in front of him, his head rested against the side window. His breathing was steady and relaxed. He was indeed asleep. Delighted, Mia gently eased her foot off the gas pedal, gradually reducing the car's speed to avoid alerting the sleeping man. With each subtle adjustment, she fought to keep the car's movement steady, all while ensuring a smooth approach to the rest area exit. The rest area was still a quarter-mile away from them, hidden from the view of the highway by a cluster of pine trees. Mia slowed down and carefully steered off the highway, inch by inch. Silently praying for the trucks to be there, she held her breath while maneuvering around the trees. She breathed out in a quiet rush of thankfulness and relief upon spotting the trucks in the rest area. 5 trucks were parked ahead, opposite the small restroom building. Despite the absence of any activity in the early morning, she thought she could hear one of the diesel engines running. Her heart pounded rapidly against her ribs, but she resisted the urge to act immediately. In order to improve her chances, she needed to be right beside the trucks, ready to reach one of the doors before Neil could stop her. As Mia approached within 15 yards of the first truck, she was certain she heard the engine. Her foot subtly moved towards the brake. All her senses were focused on the truck that she yelped in shock when Neil suddenly sat up. "Where the hell?" he started to say, but Mia didn't allow him to finish. Stepping on the brake, she grabbed the door handle and pushed it open, throwing herself out of the moving car. She landed on her side in the snowy ground. Pain shot through her muscles, and in a whirl of agony and fear, she watched the car's rear tire pass by, narrowly missing her hand, before the car came to an abrupt halt. Help me!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, scrambling to her knees, her feet slipping as she fought to stand in the slush and snow. "Help me!" she screamed again, but this time she had finally stood to her feet, running towards the truck closest to her when Neil rushed out of the car, jumping around the front of the car and running straight towards her, and blocking her path to help. Mia quickly changed her direction to avoid him. "Someone please help me!" she screamed louder than the first, and running towards the restroom as she intended to lock herself in there until someone would come out to help her. But off to her right, she saw one of the truck doors being pushed open and the driver rushing down, frowning at the commotion that had woken him up from his sleep. Close behind her, Mia heard Neil's feet pounding into the snow. He would soon catch up to her if the truck driver didn't look her way. "Help me!" she yelled at the driver, and she glanced over her shoulder just in time to see Neil scoop up a handful of snow from the ground. He hurled it towards her direction. Before she could move, the snowball hit her hard on the shoulder and she screamed more loudly as she increased her pace. "Oh, stop him! But he suddenly laughed a few feet behind her, drowning out her own words. "Cut it out, sweetheart!" he yelled at the same time he launched himself at her in a running tackle. "You're waking everyone up," he said in a loud laughter that drowned out her cry for help. Trying to drag in enough air to scream again, Mia tried to twist away from him, but she only ended up landing underneath his sprawled body in the snow, the breath knocked out of her, her terrified brown eyes only inches from his enraged ones, his teeth clenched into a fake smile designed to fool the truck driver. Panting heavily, Mia jerked her head aside to scream, just as he smashed a handful of wet snow onto her face to keep her quiet. Choking and blinded by the snow, she heard his savage whisper as he caught her wrists and yanked them above her head. "I'll kill him if he comes any closer," he warned, tightening his grip on her hands. "Damn you, is that what you want? Does someone have to die for your stupidity?" Mia sobbed, unable to speak, and shook her head, her eyes clenched shut, unable to bear the sight of his face that was an inch away from hers, unable to endure knowing she'd come within a few feet of freedom, and all for nothing, for this, to end up on her back in the snow with his body crushing hers, her hip hurting from her deliberate fall from the moving car. She heard his swift intake of breath, the furious urgency in his tone. "He's walking over here, Mia. Kiss me and make it look good, or I'll have no choice but to shoot him." Before she could react, his mouth crushed down on hers. Chapter 127 Kissing on the Snow. Mia's eyes flew open, her gaze moving to the truck driver who was cautiously walking toward them, frowning as he tried to peer at their faces. "Goddamn it! Put your arms around me and pretend you like what we are doing," Neil warned against her lips. His mouth was imprisoning hers, the gun in his pocket was grazing her side, but he had released her wrists now. She could struggle, and very possibly, the truck driver with a friendly face would see that something was very wrong and come to her rescue. And he would die. Neil had ordered her to put her arms around him and pretend she liked what he was doing. Like a puppet, Mia moved her leaden wrists from the snow and let them drop limply onto his shoulders, but she could not make herself do more than that and only allowed him to kiss her. Neil tasted her stiff lips beneath his, he felt her body, rigid as stone beneath his weight, and he assumed that she was trying to gather her strength for the next moment when she, with the help of 5 truck drivers, would put an end to his brief freedom and his life. From the corner of his eye, he saw the driver slow down, but he was still coming toward them, and his expression was growing increasingly cautious and skeptical. He didn't want to kill anyone, but if he had to do it to avoid going back to that hellhole, that was starting to turn him mad, he would do it. All this and more raced through Neil's mind in the space of the 3 seconds they lay there, pretending unconvincingly to kiss. In a last helpless effort to stop the inevitable from happening to him, Neil dragged his mouth to her ear and whispered the words he hadn't let himself use in years. "Please, help me." Tightening his arms around the rigid woman, he said it again with a groaning urgency he couldn't suppress. "Please, Mia." Feeling as if the world had suddenly gone insane, Mia heard the plea wrench from him as if it were torn from his chest a moment before his lips seized hers, and he said in a tormented whisper against her mouth, "I didn't kill anyone. I swear to anything and everything that's holy." The pleading and desperation she'd heard in his voice were eloquently alive in his kiss, and it accomplished what his threats and anger could not. It made Mia hesitate and waver. It made her believe that what she heard in his voice was the truth. Dazed by the confusing messages racing through her brain, she sacrificed her escape for the safety of the truck driver. Driven by the need to spare the man's life and by something less sensible and completely unexplainable, Mia blinked back her tears and slid her hands hesitantly over Neil's shoulders and yielded to his kiss. The moment she did, Neil sensed her surrender. A shudder ran through him and his lips gentled on hers. Unaware of the man's footsteps crunching to a stop in the snow, Mia let him part her lips, and of their own volition, her fingers curved around his neck, sliding into the soft, thick hair at his nape. She felt his swift, indrawn breath when she hesitantly returned the kiss, and suddenly everything began to change. He was kissing her in earnest now, his hands shifting, sliding over her shoulders, and then burying in her wet hair, lifting her face closer to his hungry, searching mouth. Somewhere inside her chest, where her heart had laid dormant for 5 years, the warmth of his lips on hers seemed to travel into her heart, wrenching it back alive as it began to beat in a rapid rhythm. Somewhere far above her, the truck driver's bewildered voice called out, "Woman, you need help or what?" Mia heard him, and she tried to shake her head, but the mouth that was slanting fiercely over hers now had robbed her of the ability to speak. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was only a performance for the driver's benefit. She knew it as clearly as she knew she had no choice but to participate in the performance. But if that was true, then why was she feeling heat surge through her body to the extent she was arching her body to his rigid form? "I guess you don't," said the truck driver on a lewd chuckle as he watched the couple kissing intensely on the snow ground as if there was no tomorrow. He could feel his own body coming to life just from watching them. "How about you, sir?" He glanced at Neil. "Do you need any help with what you're doing? I could give you a hand down there." Neil's head lifted just enough to break contact with Mia's mouth, his voice husky. "Find your own woman," he snapped at the driver. "This one is mine." The last word was breathed against Mia's lips before his mouth touched hers again, his arms sweeping around her, his tongue sliding hungrily across her lips, urging them to part, his hips hard and demanding against hers. With a silent moan of surrender, Mia gave herself up to what became the hottest, sexiest, most insistent kiss she'd ever tasted. For 5 years, her body had felt like it had died and would never get aroused again. She'd thought she had lost the ability to engage in any sexual activities. She'd thought she would never like to be kissed or touched ever again, but today she was experiencing something she had thought she would never experience again. She was aroused. Yards away, a truck door opened and a new male voice called, "Hey, what's going on over there in the snow?" asked the other driver. "Hell, man, what does it look like?" "A couple of grown-ups are playing at being kids, having snowball fights and making out in the snow," said the truck driver who was standing over the couple. He looked down at them again and saw how the kiss had grown intense. Flushing deeply, he turned back to his friend. "Looks to me like they're going to be making a kid on the snow if they don't slow down at this rate." Perhaps it was the new male voice or the sudden realization that the man atop of her was becoming physically aroused that snapped Mia into reality, or perhaps it was the slamming of the truck door followed by the roar of an engine as the truck began to pull away from the rest area. Whatever the cause, she put her hands against his shoulders and exerted pressure, but it took an unnatural effort for her to move, and her shove did nothing to make him stop kissing her. He kissed her like a starved man who had finally been given food. His rough hands were roaming all around her body. Panicked by her lack of strength to push him off, Mia clenched her fist and slammed it hard against his chest. "Stop it," she cried softly against his lips. "Stop it. He's gone." Stunned by the sound of tears in her voice, Neil lifted his head, staring at her dewy skin and soft mouth with a hunger that he was finding difficult to control. The exquisite sweetness of her surrender, the way she felt in his arms, and the gentleness of her touch almost made the notion of making love in the snow at dawn seem plausible. Slowly, he looked around at where they were and reluctantly levered himself up off her body when he realized the truck drivers were indeed gone. He didn't completely understand why she'd decided not to scream to the truck driver to help her when he was standing so close to them earlier, but whatever her reasons, he owed her more than an attempted rape in the snow as repayment. Silently, he held his hand out to her, suppressing an amused smile when the same woman who'd melted in his arms a moment ago unleashed her defenses by pointedly ignoring his gesture of helping her up. She pushed herself up and out of the snow. "I'm soaking wet," she complained, carefully avoiding his gaze and swatting at her damp hair, and covered in snow. Automatically, Neil reached out to brush the snow off her hair, but she jumped out of his reach, avoiding his touch as she brushed off her arms and the back of her pants. "Don't think you have the right to touch me just because of what happened just now," she warned him, glaring at him, but Neil was preoccupied with admiration for the results of their kiss. Her huge, dark-lashed eyes were lustrous, her snow-white skin tinted with roses at the cheeks. When flustered and a little aroused, as she was now, Mia Harrison was absolutely breathtaking. She was also courageous and very kind, just like she had always been in the past, for although he'd not been able to subdue her with threats or cruelty, she'd somehow responded to the desperation in his plea. Noticing how he was looking at her like he was just seeing her for the first time, Mia resumed to warn so he wouldn't cross any boundaries again. "The only reason I let you kiss me was because I realized you were right. There's no need for anyone to get killed just because I'm scared. And, please stop looking at me like that. Now, let's get going and get this ordeal over with." Neil sighed. "I gather from that sour tone of yours that we're rivals again, Miss Harrison?" "Of course we are, and we will always be," she replied, dusting off her rear end. "I'll take you wherever you're going without any more tricks, but let's get one thing straight, Mr. Wayner. As soon as I get you there, I'll be free to leave, right?" "Of course," Neil lied with a straight face. "Then let's get going. I have Christmas shopping to do tomorrow." Brushing snow off the sleeves of his jacket, Neil followed along behind her, watching her hair tossing in the wind and the graceful sway of her slim hips as she stalked toward their car. Judging from her words and the rigid set of her shoulders, there was no doubt she was determined to avoid any further romantic confrontations between them. In that, as in everything else, Neil was now firmly committed to accomplishing a goal that was in complete opposite to her own. He had tasted her lips again after 5 years and he had felt their response to him. His starved senses craved more than just a kiss. He desired to feast in the full banquet, to go beyond a mere kiss and possess her, even though he knew she was engaged to that bastard Owen and likely had been intimate with him or another man. Despite this, he remained determined to have her. A part of his mind cautioned that any sexual involvement with her would be foolish, complicating matters unnecessarily. Yet, another part of his mind heeded the clamor of his aroused body and argued that it was cunning. After all, contented captives could become willing participants and delightful companions. Neil resolved to seduce her, turning his daring escape into a pleasurable adventure for both of them. He aimed to make her succumb to him, to make love to her in a way she had never experienced with her foolish fiancé, ensuring he would leave an indelible mark on her. While she had once forgotten their childhood, she would never forget this moment. He didn't plan to make love to her because she possessed endearing qualities that captivated him, or because he found her highly attractive, or because he harbored any budding affection for her. Instead, he rationalized that he would make love to Mia Harrison because he knew they both desired it, and, of course, because it would bring immense pleasure. With a newfound courtesy that had been absent before their kiss and that Mia found entirely absurd, and even unsettling given their current circumstances, Neil escorted her to the driver's seat, though he didn't need to open the door for her as it was still ajar from her earlier attempt to escape. After closing the car door behind her, he circled around to the front of the vehicle. As he settled into the seat beside her, he noticed her wince and gasp when she shifted position. "What's wrong? Did I hurt you?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I hurt my hip and leg when I jumped out of the car and when you tackled me," Mia retorted bitterly, angry with herself for having actually enjoyed that kiss on the snow. "Does that fill you with concern and remorse?" she asked. He said quietly, "Yes, it does." Mia quickly shifted her gaze from his somber face, unable and unwilling to be charmed into believing such an implausible lie. He murdered her mother in cold blood, and she must not, dared not, forget that ever again. "I'm starving," she announced, because it was the first thing she could think of to say. She knew it was the wrong thing the moment his gaze fastened on her swollen lips. "So am I," he whispered. She stuck her chin in the air to hide the redness that rushed to her cheeks and turned on the ignition. His answer was a soft chuckle and a shake of his head. Chapter 128. Owen Sullivan. The city of Mirage Mesa was covered in light snow, far lighter than the snowland where the couple were heading in the red BMW. The winter morning sun painted the sky with hues of pink and orange, casting long shadows across the icy grounds of the capital city, Mirage Mesa. A mansion was seen standing tall and sleek, its modern design accented by shimmering glass panels and cutting-edge technology. Bodyguards in impeccable black suits could be seen patrolling the grounds with precision, their alert eyes scanning for any potential threats. Inside the lavish living room of the mansion, Owen's pacing echoed against the marble floors as worry etched lines into his brow. His black suit clung to his athletic frame, emphasizing his imposing presence. With one hand tucked inside his pocket, the other one was holding a phone to his ear. Where could she be? His deep voice resonated with frustration as he dialed Mia's number for the 100th time, only to be met with the same infuriating message: turned off. With a growl of frustration, Owen hurled the phone across the room, the device shattering against the wall. He turned sharply to his bodyguards, his jaw clenched with anger. "Have you checked every route from Novaria to Mirage Mesa?" Owen demanded, his voice taut with tension. The men nodded in unison, their expressions grim. "Every inch, sir," one of them confirmed. Owen's frustration boiled over, his pacing becoming more frantic by the second. Mia was supposed to arrive here since yesterday evening, but it was already morning and there were no signs of her entering the city. He wouldn't have been this worried if he hadn't heard the news that Neil Wayner had escaped from prison in Novaria. He didn't like the feeling he was having, the feeling that they might have met each other in the state. For years, Owen had lived his life trying to please Mia and make her trust him again. He had accomplished that goal 3 years ago when he pretended to fall sick at her doorstep to get her attention. On that day she'd looked after him and stayed awake just to treat his fever, which he had brought upon himself by staying out in the rain. He could never forget the day because it was the day she learned she had no one else but him in the world. "Don't you think fate wants us to be together?" he had asked her when he woke up from his fake sickness. "You lost your mother and I lost my father, the only family we both have. We only have each other now. You and I have to remain strong to make our late parents proud." He had told her, but he didn't care less if his useless father was proud of him or not. All he cared about was having Mia in his life, and if by pretending and saying sentimental words like that would make her let him into her life, he was willing to do just that. "Please, Mia, don't shut me out of your life. Let's be friends again, just like we used to be in the past. You and I against the world. Though Aunt Elizabeth is no more, she wouldn't be happy seeing us grow apart." He had whispered those words to her when she was sitting beside him, and when she heard about her mother, silent tears streamed down her face. Seeing that he was accomplishing his goal, Owen had added, "It's fine if you don't want us to be friends. I understand that you have given your heart to Neil Wayner, despite the fact that he killed. I gave him nothing." Mia had cut him off with anguished tears streaming down her cheeks. "I hate him so much, Owen. I want him to rot in prison for killing my mom. He is a monster and I will never forgive him." Never. And that was how she let Owen into her life. Remembering the day he convinced her now, Owen felt immensely proud of himself, but his feeling of proudness was short-lived when he realized there was a possibility that the two of them were together now. Impossible. Owen shook his head in denial. It was impossible for them to be together. Mia had made it clear how much she hated Neil Wayner, and if she were to see him again, she would make it her goal to see that he was captured back again. Perhaps he was overthinking everything. Mia was engaged to him now and the world knows that. Neil Wayner would think twice before he would abduct Owen Sullivan's fiancée. But he couldn't help feeling that Neil had something to do with Mia not returning home. Just then, a hushed voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Sullivan, sir," one of the guards spoke, stepping into the room with a sense of urgency. "Mr. Rodrigo has arrived, and he's not in a good mood. He's on his way in." Owen's jaw tightened at the mention of Kelvin Rodrigo. With a resigned sigh, he straightened his posture, preparing himself for the inevitable confrontation with his big boss. He could already tell why the man was here. "Let him in," Owen instructed, his voice clipped with tension. Moments later, the imposing figure of Kelvin Rodrigo strode into the room, escorted by a cohort of men who exuded an aura of authority. His expression was thunderous, a storm brewing behind his steely gaze. "Owen," Kelvin's voice was low, a dangerous edge lacing his words. "We need to talk," he said as he made his way towards the private room in Owen's residence. "I know you've also heard the news of Wayner's escape," said Kelvin as he got inside the room and made himself comfortable on the couch. "So tell me, what's this I'm hearing about your fiancé going missing?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of displeasure. "Mia is not missing, she's just taking longer than normal to return home from her interview in Novaria," Owen replied, knowing and understanding why Kelvin Rodrigo paid him a visit. "I know that you are worried about Mia interfering with your business, but it's been 5 years now and she still has no memories of you or what you did to her in the past. I gave you my word that she won't be a threat whatsoever to you, and she won't. She will soon be my wife, and when that happens, I plan to take full control of her life. And take your damn life as well for what you did to my woman," he added silently in his mind. "I hope as hell you mean everything you are telling me, because if she dares to mess up, I won't hesitate to finish her off." At this point, Wayner is on the run and there has been news that he was seen at the airport this morning. "You better pray to the Lord that he isn't with your fiancé, because that will not only complicate things for me, but it'll also ruin your reputation. We should have paid someone to finish that bastard off in prison, but now he is on the run." Kelvin gritted in frustration. As long as he can't prove himself to be innocent, he will end up going back to the prison. Owen shrugged. He killed those students in Elizabeth, and the parents of the students he killed won't let him off just like that. He will either get shot down or dragged back to prison. He remarked so casually as he was now certain that Neil Wayner was not a threat to him. He didn't care about Neil as long as his Mia returned home. "You shouldn't act so casual about this, Owen." Wayner, or at least a man fitting his description, was last seen at a restaurant in Novaria near the highway. Kelvin said, watching as Owen's nonchalance began to turn into a frown. "What are you getting at?" he asked. "Wayner was seen near a vehicle that sounds like your girl's car. A waitress in the restaurant thinks she saw him get into the red BMW with a woman who'd stopped there for breakfast." Kelvin stood up from the chair and turned towards the window. "I sent my men to talk with the waitress 5 minutes ago. The description she gave me of the woman who drove away with Wayner in the BMW sounds exactly like Mia's. I think your girl has so much going on under her sleeves you are unaware of." "I thought you said he was seen at the airport?" Owen exploded. Nonetheless, knowing Kelvin Rodrigo was his boss, he controlled his rage and calmed himself. "Did I?" Kelvin turned over his shoulder and smirked. "That's what he wants everyone to believe. I think Wayner is with your girl, and right now, that girl is giving me more than one reason to kill her. She was never meant to exist anyway. It was a mistake that should have been taken care of if it weren't for Ella and Elizabeth's interference. Do something about this, or else, I will be left with no other choice but to kill them both." Owen's fingers clenched into fists, his blue eyes darkened dangerously. "I will kill that bastard if he lays a finger on my woman." Chapter 129, I Lied. "Oh my God! We're lost, I know it. Where in heaven's name are we even going? What could possibly be up there on the mountains?" Mia's voice shook with nervous tension as she peered through snow hurtling at her windshield. Her entire car was covered in snow. Thanks to the windshield wiper blades, they were able to see where they were headed. They'd left the highway and turned onto a hilly road that climbed the mountain in an endless series of switchback turns that would have made her nervous in the summer. Now, with slippery snow and poor visibility to complicate things, the climb was hair-raising and nerve-wracking. And just when she thought the drive couldn't get worse, they had turned onto a twisting road so narrow that the branches of the thick black pines on either side of it reached out and brushed against the sides of the car, leaving scratches. "I know you're tired," she heard Neil say when she gritted her teeth in annoyance. "If I trusted you enough not to jump out of the car, I'd have done the driving and let you get some rest." Ever since their kiss nearly 13 hours ago, Neil had been treating her with a warm courtesy that was far more alarming to Mia than his anger had been, because she couldn't shake the feeling that he had changed his plans and his intended use for her. As a result, she'd responded to all his pleasant conversational efforts with sharp, rude remarks that made her seem and feel like someone who was ready for a fight. She blamed him completely for that, too. However, he hadn't lost his temper whatsoever with all of her jabbing words. He would simply smile or shake his head in amusement. Ignoring his statement now, she gave him a cold shrug. According to your map and the directions, we're going the right way, but there wasn't any indication about a road that goes straight up to the mountains. This is a car, not a plane or a snowplow. He sighed and handed her a soft drink they had bought at a gas station, convenience store, where they'd also gotten fuel, and he'd escorted her once again to the restroom and waited for her at the door with a warm smile that made her more alarmed than ever. When he handed her the soft drink without replying to her complaint about the treacherous road, Mia fell silent. Under any other circumstances, she'd have been mesmerized with the breathtaking views of majestic snow-covered mountains and soaring pine trees, but it was impossible to enjoy the view when it required all her concentration and effort just to keep the car moving in the right direction. At long last, they were nearing their destination, Mia assumed, because they had turned off the last decent road over 20 minutes ago. Now they were making their way up a mountain in a full-fledged blizzard on a road that seemed only inches wider than her car. "I hope whoever gave you these directions knew what he was doing," she said. "Really?" he teased. "I expect you to hope we were lost." She ignored the good-natured amusement in his voice. "I'd love it if you were lost, but I have no desire to be lost with you. The point is, I've been driving in terrible weather on terrible roads for over 24 hours and I'm exhausted." She trailed off in alarm at the sight of the wide, frozen river ahead of them with no bridge whatsoever. Until 2 days ago, the weather had been unseasonably warm in Mirage Mesa, and melting snow had caused the frozen rivers to start to melt as well. And it had been announced that no one should go skating or step on any frozen river. Don't tell me we will drive past that river. It doesn't look safe." "The river. We don't have much choice." She heard the concern in his voice, and fear sent her foot to slam on the brake pedal. "I'm not driving across that damned river." She shook her head repeatedly. What if they drove past the river and it cracked open? She wasn't ready to die in a place like this where no one would find her body because it had been buried in a frozen river along with a murderer. Neil, however, had come too far to turn back, and besides, turning back on the narrow snow-rutted lane was impossible. So was backing down the mountain on those switchback turns. The road had been plowed recently, probably this morning by Liam's men, who Liam had promised would arrange everything for him. Evidently, Liam had also had his men plow the road towards the river to make certain Neil could get in if he tried. Still, the river didn't look safe to him. Though it looked frozen enough for someone to walk over, it couldn't be safe enough with a car. And they couldn't park the car here and walk the rest of the distance. That would be another form of suicide because they'd freeze to death before reaching his residence. "Get out," he said to Mia after a moment of thinking through their situation. Mia's eyes widened in horror. "Gee, get out? I'll freeze to death in an hour. Is that what you intended all along? For me to drive you this far and then leave me to die in the snow?" None of her rude remarks had pierced his good humor all day, but her agitated words did just that. His jaw tightened, and icy anger edged his voice. "Get out of the car," he snapped. "I'll drive it across the river. If it holds, you can walk across it and get into the car on the other side." If he would die today, he wouldn't want to drag her to hell with him. Mia needed no further urging. Clutching her sweater around her, she happily opened the door and got out, but her happiness at being safe turned to something else, something utterly absurd under the circumstances. As she watched him move under the steering wheel, she felt guilty for leaving the car, ashamed of her cowardice and strangely worried about his safety. And she felt even worse when he reached in the back seat and took out her long overcoat and 2 of her car blankets and passed them to her through the open door and said, "If the river doesn't hold, wrap yourself up in these and find a narrow place on the river where you can cross on foot. At the top of the hill, there's a house with smartphones and plenty of food. You can call for help and wait the storm out up there until it arrives." He'd said, "If the river doesn't hold," without betraying any emotion in his voice or face, and Mia shivered at the realization that Neil Wayner could risk his own life without the slightest apparent concern. If the river didn't hold, then he and the heavy car would both end up plunging into the freezing water and dying. With those thoughts, she quickly clutched the door to prevent him from closing it. "If it doesn't hold," she said quickly, "I'll throw you a rope or a branch or something so that you can get to the bank." He closed the door on her last words, and shivering, Mia clutched the coat and blankets to her body while warily glancing around the icy wonderland. She watched as the car's tires spun in the snow and began to inch forward. She held her breath, murmuring a silent prayer for the man inside the car. Without realizing it, she found herself walking towards the river. There, she looked down into the reflective icy ground, trying to imagine what it would feel like if it were to crack open and he plunged inside. A nervous shiver ran down her spine at the thought. Her fear escalated to panic when she heard a crack sound. "Stop!" she yelled, trying to make him hear her over the howling wind. "We can leave the car here and we can both walk the distance while sharing the blankets." If he heard her at all, he didn't stop the car. The frozen river stretched out before Neil, its surface shimmering under the gloomy weather. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his breath forming tiny clouds in the frigid air. His desperation propelled him forward, driving him to take this dangerous path across the treacherous ice. The car crept cautiously onto the frozen expanse, the tires crunching softly against the hardened surface. Each creak and groan of the ice sent shivers down Mia's spine. She watched in horror as he drove forward. As he neared the midpoint of the river, a sudden crack echoed through the atmosphere, causing Mia to gasp in fear. The car jolted slightly, and panic threatened to overwhelm her. Suddenly she heard the river begin to groan and she screamed, "Don't go further. The river won't hold you. Get out! Get out of the car!" It was too late. The BMW 7 was already moving steadily across the creaking river. Blankets clutched to her chest, snow swirling all around her. Mia stood in a state of helpless paralysis, forced to watch what she could not prevent. Not until the car, along with its insane driver, reached safely on the other side did she breathe again, and then she felt a rush of anger at him for putting her through yet another new terror. She was too angry to feel the fear of walking across the river. She clutched her blanket tightly and started to walk across it. Reaching the other side, she opened the passenger door and climbed in, then slammed the door with a loud thud. "We made it," he said when she got in. Mia gave him a killing look. "Made it to what? I don't see anything here but an endless snow-covered land." She glared at him and looked away. She had no idea where he intended to go. There were no signs of any house here. Was there? Well, the answer to that came minutes later when they made one last switchback turn at the top of the mountain. There in the middle of a secluded clearing in the dense pines was a magnificent cabin, its wooden exterior glistening in the snow. The house boasted an expansive glass facade. "We made it to this," he announced. Mia's jaw slackened as she watched the cabin in wonderment. Though for the past 5 years, she had seen and lived in expensive homes, but this, it was breathtaking, unlike anything she'd ever lived in. "Who in heaven's name built such a magnificent place up here?" she murmured softly. "Someone who obviously likes privacy and solitude." He replied, not telling her he was the owner of the place. "Does it belong to you or someone you know?" she asked, suddenly suspicious. "No. Does the owner know you're going to use his place for a hideout while the military are looking for you?" "You ask too many questions," he said, pulling the car to a stop beside the mansion and climbing out. "But the answer is no." He came around to her side of the car and opened the door for her. "Let's go, let's go," Mia burst out, pressing into the back of the seat. "You said I could leave when I got you here." "I lied." Chapter 130 The Lady of the House. "I lied," he said so casually as he waited for her to climb down the car. You bastard, I believed you," Mia cried, but she was lying, too. All day long she had been trying desperately to ignore what her common sense had warned her. She had a feeling that he had kept her with him this long to prevent her from telling the authorities where he was. If he released her now, there was absolutely nothing to prevent her from doing exactly that. She would gladly give his hideout away to the military. "Mia," he said with strained patience, "don't make this any harder on yourself than it needs to be. You're stuck here for some days, and it's not that bad of a place to spend some time. Just think of it like a vacation. Besides, it's the holidays and the place is beautiful." Saying that, he reached across her, snatched the keys out of the ignition, and walked off toward the house without waiting for her. He knew she had no place to run to unless she planned to freeze to death while trying to escape him. For a split second Mia was too furious and too miserable to move, then she blinked back the tears of helplessness stinging her eyes and got out of the car. Shivering uncontrollably in the freezing blasts of wind, she followed in his wake, carefully placing her feet in the pit his feet made in the snow pile surrounding the lone mansion. She didn't know for how long she would be stuck here with him, but at this point, she was helpless and at a disadvantage. She hoped Owen would be looking for her by now. Wrapping her arms around herself, she watched Neil try to turn the doorknob of the house. But it was locked. He rattled it hard. It was locked tight. He let go of the door handle and stood there, his hands on his hips, looking around him, momentarily lost in thought. Mia's teeth began to chatter, her body shivering uncontrollably from the intense cold. And now what? She asked. How do you intend to get in WW without a key? He gave her an ironic glance. How do you think? Without waiting for her to reply, he turned and headed toward the side of the building. Like a little child, Mia trotted carefully at his heels, freezing and furious that he brought them here when he had no keys to open the mansion's main entrance. Don't tell me you plan to break a glass? She asked. Then she looked up at the giant panes of glass that soared up to the peak of the building's roof and added, if you break one glass, the rest will fall down and cut you to pieces and to your death. Don't sound so hopeful, Ms., he said, his gaze looking around at several large mounds of snow that had obviously gathered over something beneath them. He began digging in one of the mounds and soon enough, he uncovered a large flower pot, which he picked up and carried toward the back door. Now what on earth are you doing? Mia asked, following on his heels again. Guess, he replied with a smile in his tone. How should I know? Mia snapped. You're the criminal, not me. You are the one who's well versed in breaking into people's houses. And you are obviously trying to break into this one. You are right, but I was sent up for murder, not breaking and entering. In disbelief, Mia watched him trying to dig into the frozen soil of the flower pot. Then he slammed the pot against the side of the house and broke it, dumping the soil onto the snow beside the door. Wordlessly, he crouched down and began hammering his bare fist on the solid soil while Mia watched in shocked amazement. Are you having a temper tantrum? She asked cautiously, as what he was doing at this moment made no sense to her. Why on earth would he be hammering the soil with his fist unless he wanted to release his uncontrollable temper? No, Miss Harrison, he replied with a tight tone, as he plucked up a piece of dirt from the soil and brushed at it with his finger. I am looking for a key. No one who can afford a beautiful house like this and pay to put a road up an entire mountain in order to get to it is going to be naive enough to hide a key in a flower pot. You're wasting your time. Have you always been such a shrew? He said with an irritated shake of his dark head. A shrew, Mia said, her voice strangled with frustration. You steal my car along with me, threaten my life, lie to me, and now you have the guts to criticize my manners? Her outburst was interrupted as he held up a dirt-covered golden object that Mia realized was a key, which he then inserted in the door. With a smooth flourish movement, he swung open the door and gestured her inside with a sweep of his arm. We've already agreed that I am a cold-blooded murderer, a heartless beast and a kidnapper who took an innocent young woman against her will. Now, I suggest you go inside and look around while I get our things out of the car. Why don't you try to relax, he added. Get some rest. Enjoy the mountain view. I know you are tired from having to always worry about your work in the city. Here you don't have to worry about that. Take it as a free vacation. Mia glared at him open-mouthed, then snapped her jaws together and said irately, I'm not on a vacation. I'm a hostage being kept against my will, and don't expect me to forget that. In answer to her words, he gave her a long-suffering look, as if she were being impossibly difficult, so she jerked her gaze from his and huffed at his face before she walked into the house. Inside, the house was a huge, luxurious two-story building, with a brown, cozy theme. Soaring wood ceilings with a gigantic chandelier. The staircase had red carpet spread on them from the top to the bottom. The living room walls were made entirely of glass, offering the view of the mountains that Mia knew would be breathtaking on a clear summer day. She stood there, mesmerized by the sight of the house. At one side of the room was an enormous fireplace carved in the center of a native stone. Facing the fireplace was a long L-shaped black sofa with fluffy pillows. Opposite the sofa and facing the windows were two overstuffed chairs and cushions made in black and silver stripes that blended with the thick carpet that covered part of the gleaming wooden floor in front of the fireplace. At any other time, Mia would have been awed and intrigued by what was the most unique and beautiful place she'd ever seen, but she was too upset and too hungry to give it more than a passing notice. Turning, she wandered into the kitchen area, and was stunned at the dark theme she was greeted with. As she stood at the entrance, a memory from 5 years ago flashed to her mind, a memory of the day she went to cook in his condo after they returned from a local market. Then, another memory of them kissing in his kitchen popped into her mind. She shook the memory away as quickly as it came to her, as anything that has to do with him in the past had become a taboo to her. Her stomach suddenly growled as she looked at the black cabinets and the built-in refrigerator, but her appetite was already losing the battle with her exhaustion. Feeling like a sneak thief, She opened a cabinet that contained dishes and glassware, then another that contained, luckily, a wide variety of canned goods. Deciding to make a quick sandwich and then go to bed, she was reaching timidly for a can of albacore tuna fish when Neil opened the back door of the kitchen and saw her reaching for it like a sneak thief. Jerking her gaze to him, she looked like a little thief who had been caught stealing. "I hope," he said, suppressing the urge to laugh at her reaction while kicking snow off his boots, "that this means you're taking charge of the kitchen and the house?" "Do you mean, if I'm taking charge of cooking?" She frowned. "Yes, not for you." Mia put the can of tuna back and closed the cabinet door just as her stomach let out an audible growl of protest, and she flushed in embarrassment. But she stubbornly ignored it. She would rather starve to death than cook for him or take charge of anything. "God, you were as stubborn as I remembered," he said, rubbing his hands together. He walked over to the thermostat on the wall and turned up the heat. Then he headed for the refrigerator and opened the freezer door. Though Neil had once hated the thought of cooking himself or washing any dishes, he had learned the hard way in prison. Mia peeked from behind him to see what was in the refrigerator and was amazed to see dozens of thick steaks and pork chops, huge roasts, some packages wrapped in white freezer paper, and boxes of vegetables, some raw and others prepared. It was a display that would do justice to any food market. Her mouth began to water as he reached for a steak that was 1.5 inches thick, but exhaustion was already overwhelming her. Her relief for being in a warm house instead of the car and at having arrived at a destination after an endless, nerve-wracking drive was suddenly making her feel limp, and she realized she wanted a hot shower and a long nap rather than food at this moment. "I think I need to get some sleep," she said after a tired yawn escaped her mouth. "Which room will I be staying, please?" Something in her pale face and heavy eyes made Neil respond without argument. "The bedroom is this way," he said, already turning on his heel and heading for a staircase and walking towards a room. When he flipped on the light switch of the room, Mia found herself in an enormous bedroom suite with a fireplace and an adjoining bathroom of black marble with mirrored walls. She spotted her smartphone on the nightstand beside the king-size bed at the same moment he did. "You can use the bath," he told her unnecessarily as he walked over to the nightstand and briskly took the phone, which he had absent-mindedly dropped on the nightstand when he came in earlier to check the room, and tucked it inside his pocket. "But no phone, I see," she added with a bitter note as she headed back into the living room to get her suitcase. Behind her, he checked the doors to the bathroom and bedroom to make sure Mia wouldn't do anything stupid later on. Then he followed her to the living room and caught her arm as she bent over to pick up her suitcase. "Let's establish the rules here," he began. "There are no other houses on this mountain except this one. I have your car keys, so your only means of leaving would be on foot, but you'd freeze to death long before reaching the highway. And don't bother locking yourself in a room. It'd be futile and unnecessary. Do you understand?" Mia tried to pull her arm away, finding his grip surprisingly strong yet not painful. "I'm not stupid." "Good. Then you should know you have free rein in the house." "Free rein? Like your servant?" "Not exactly," Neil said, his mouth quirking in a smile as he let his admiring glance rove over her thick, wavy brown hair and slim, restless figure. "More like the lady of the house." Mia opened her mouth to give him the biting retort he deserved, but she couldn't get words out before she yawned again.